Hi, welcome back to day 3 of how to buy a property, how to start out buying a property in Cleveland, Ohio in the 2026-2027 era. All right, let's get started. So first of all, today we're going to be talking about leverage. It has already been mentioned each video, but it's a huge thing. So I want to explain it just in a little more detail. So I want you to be able to visualize it so you understand. So the number of different kinds of leverage. And frankly, leverage is exactly how it sounds, a lever. Let's say you have a lever and you have a little fulcrum, little thing, and you're pushing down to lift something else up on the other side. You lever it. The longer the fulcrum, the handle is on the other side of the fulcrum, the more leverage you have. So the energy it takes to move that same thing is much less, although the movement you make or the power it takes, the physical strength you need to move something is much less, although you have to travel a farther distance moving that lever than you actually move the thing that's super heavy, right? So the idea is that you can create disproportionate motion, or you can create returns that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get. And on its surface, that seems pretty simple, and you would think, why wouldn't you leverage? And frankly, that's true, except for the fact that you always have risk with every leverage, usually risk that is disproportionate to the potential reward without some ability to actually offset that risk, right? And that's what this all comes down to. So first of all, let's give an actual example in real estate that'll help do it. And I'm going to have a picture put up on the screen. But essentially, imagine you buy a house, okay? You buy that house, and we're going to do easy numbers, $100,000, okay? And we'll just say that this is simple. So we're not talking about repairs or anything like that. You're just buying it for $100,000, and you put $20,000 down, okay? Which means, of course, that if $20,000 cash, in some way you got the cash, whether you earned it or it was given to you or you pulled it out of some other, like an equity line that you're borrowing off of, or basically equity out of some other investment, but you got that cash, converted it into cash, and you gave it in this transaction, put it down, and the balance, 80%, so $20,000, 20% of the $100,000 house, 80%, $80,000 is what you borrowed. And we're talking a simple number. So I understand that sometimes you'll end up financing some expenses or something like that in the closing and things like that. So it's not, but for the conversation, 20% down, $80,000 owed. That is it. That's the deal, right? So what happens if a year from now, the property is worth $110,000? It's increased by 10%, right? Value. It's now worth 110. That 10% was not just an increase on the cash you stuck in. If it was 10% increase on the cash, it would be a $2,000 increase. Right? But no, you're smart. You leverage. So now with $20,000, you actually now control, or 20%, you control 100% of the value of that property, and you get the full benefit of the increase, right? So now that property is worth $110,000. On paper, you made 50% cash on cash, right? So in equity, in other words, you haven't gotten to pull back and put that money into your bank account. But if we're looking at what your house is valued in that moment, 50% cash on cash return. That sounds amazing. Just look around. For passive investments anyways, there's not a lot of just like easy 50% returns. And plenty of real estate will grow 50%. That's not the typical average yearly appreciation in Cleveland, Ohio. But let's just be honest. We're talking about 2026, 2027. In the last few years, a lot of money's been printed. We have had prices going up because of inflation, right? So there's going to be some increase of prices eventually, even with other levers causing the price in real estate to go up and down, not always 100% tracking. So we're talking like interest rates affect the price, right? Regulations affect the price. But overall, hard assets are going to follow inflation. And a house is a hard asset. In other words, it's not a financial instrument. It's tangible. You can go to that house and do things with it and touch it and fix it and destroy it and whatever. It's a hard asset. It's in this physical world. And so you have this $100,000 house, up 10%, 50%. Great. Good job, investor. But wait a minute. What happens if some things happen? Let's say something happened to the house itself, or the market goes down a little bit because suddenly everyone decides that they don't like some of the regulations in Cleveland. It goes down by 10%. Easy. That happens all the time. In more fluctuating markets, a lot more. And like I'm talking areas of the country fluctuate more. Cleveland doesn't typically fluctuate that much, but they did certainly in COVID. And by the way, they fluctuated up, which was great for those who had borrowed to get that full value and then got that full value a lot more, and sometimes 30+% or more in a year in certain parts of COVID, but also 2007, 2008, there were houses, they were probably really overvalued. They were in Cleveland, there was a lot of fraud. So there was fraudulent values being set by fake transactions, right? So that wasn't even like the real market, but you could get an appraisal, this massive amount, and sometimes sell it, usually fraudulently, giving money back. There was a ton of it happening. It was almost standard. It was like huge percentages of the market were entirely fraudulent transactions, right? So, but that was pre-2007, 2008. Okay, so I'm just a little extra story. I'm sorry, a little digression, but just understanding that like the market's just a hair more complicated than the example I'm making. So again, it goes down 10%. We'll just easy numbers. Okay, it's worth 90, you owe 80, and you put 20,000 into it. So you have 100,000 into it, it's worth 90 and $20,000 cash. So if it's that the amount you owe didn't go down at all, right? All that really went down is that cash went down by 50% at face value. Okay, and this is where it gets a little more complicated. This is where you really have to understand it. Face value, it only went down 50%. But in truth, effectively, if along with it going down in value, you got in a situation where you needed to sell, the cost of sales is easy 10%. And quite possibly, if some things happen to it, needs a little work, there's a buyer's discount. And so you add in a real estate agent's commission. And yes, those have changed since the NARPM settlement. If you want to think about that, the last couple of years, there's a huge settlement and how real estate commissions, but they've only changed a little bit. Okay. Then not all of them have gone down. And frankly, a lot of the investment properties, they've stayed the same or gone up. Why? Well, because investment properties typically are lower total amounts than houses that people are living and owning, like homeowner occupied houses. So investment properties tend to be lower overall value, at least in Cleveland, the area where you have investment properties. So the commissions aren't as much. And so agents oftentimes work even harder on those, and they want more money as a percentage of the property. So your expenses could be up, is what I'm saying. And so in effect, you could easily lose 10% and think you've 50% of my investment. That's not great. Really, the whole point of an investment is not to lose it, right? First, before growing it. You want to return, but definitely you don't want to lose it, right? And so that's one of the key things. Don't lose your money. And so sophisticated investors are going to do their best to make sure they don't lose it. And that's why we're talking about this. I want you to be more of a sophisticated investor mindset, not to have to learn by other people's mistakes, by your own mistakes, learn by other people's mistakes, which is why I'm trying to give you now, right? So I'm giving you an example of what happens all the time in the Cleveland market. Okay. I've seen it happen. It's happened personally to me. I've seen it happen. And trust me, I've seen many more people have even worse issues than I've ever had. Okay. So you have this story, and this is like, I'm not giving like real numbers because I'm trying to simplify it. Like I'm not going through an actual deal that this happened, but this is like a real possibility. Okay. So, but I'm going to explain how to get through it. But you understand, okay, 50% of your investment's lost off the bat, but wait, there's more, and not in a good way, and these other expenses. So in reality, when you put 20% down, you've leveraged 5 times. So what it means is the original investment, you're controlling 5 times the original investment with that investment at 20%, right? Now, 5 times means you can have 5 times the reward. So in the case of the 10% raise in price, your equity was 50%, not 10%, right? A 10% raise, 50% raise in your equity, in your cash on cash return. So 5 times the reward, right? And then at face value, if it only goes down 10% and you're looking at your equity, you have only $10,000 left of your $20,000. So that's 50% decrease in your equity on the house. Again, 5 times. It was a 10% decrease of loss on the overall investment, but because your mortgage is fixed, all of that came out of your equity, which was leveraged by 5 times. So instead of a 10% decrease in equity, so you put 20,000 in, 10% decrease would be 18,000 left, right? No, you have 10,000 left. So instead of only losing 2,000 on that 20,000 investment, you lost 5 times that, or 50%. So 10,000 you lost, right? That's a 50% decrease at face value. But again, like I said, there's more. Oftentimes with something distressful, they call it distressed properties. You want to buy low, you buy distressed property, right? But you're supposed to sell high as an investor, right? Buy low, sell high. That's what investors do. That's what a good investor does, right? Well, you bought high, full retail. It wasn't distressed. Put 20% down, boom. And then you're forced, it goes down, it's distressed now. Could be a number of distressing attributes. There's many opportunities in Cleveland for distress. Suddenly you're forced into a distressed sale. Any number of distressing attributes can disproportionately affect that end sale price. And so suddenly on paper went down 10%, but like I said, there's other costs that could quickly add up. And suddenly, not only do you lose what you put into it, but you lose more. So you could have 100% loss, not 100% loss, but 150% loss, 200% loss, 300% loss, right? Real easily, like that, with small changes, right? The key here, the reason I'm talking about this, is to reiterate a previous point, okay? You need reserves, period. I'm not going to Dave Ramsey you. I'm not going to say you can't borrow anything. I'm just saying, guys, listen, Dave Ramsey felt the pain, right? If the story, he had like 50 houses or 100 houses. He was a mogul at like early ages, went. And so he went crazy and he said, I'm never going to borrow anything, right? Listen, I'm not going to say that. I'm just saying be smart. Don't think you can outrun the powers of compounding interest and the opposite compounding, like loss on debt, leverage on debt that comes back against you. Can't outrun that. There's even a number of examples in like the larger financial markets of hedge funds that thought they had figured it out. And with just a slight swing, they had compounded their investment they had leveraged their investment so much, and little anomalies in the market happened that they could never have known. They could have never predicted. Boom, all gone plus some. That's what happens when you leverage. And they didn't have the ability to offset that. Now, with tangible assets, you can get more involved and offset potential losses. You can't offset all of them. There's just things you can't control in terms of the larger market. But you could say, what? I'm just going to buy another house right next to the one that I bought for investment and live there and look at it, look in the windows and make sure, and have a gun. And like you can have almost unlimited amounts of extra things you do if you're able to. Don't think that you're probably going to do that. It lowers the value of your investment to have to do that type of thing. That's why I say don't get a property you would feel like you need to do that. But at the end of the day, most of the issues can just be fixed on majority of any rental house in Cleveland, other than the high risk stuff. Most of those can be offset just with $20,000. I know for some people that's a lot. Like, well, I can't get my get rich quick scheme. I can't leverage 50 houses in 2 years out of nothing. It's better than losing it all. Trust me, it'd be very painful if that all comes down in a crash, right? Small change in the market could erase all of that, right? So your staying power it comes down to one simple thing: reserves after it. That's why I have the 20% rule of after it's all done up to a higher standard, still another $20,000, 20% that is. $20,000 in a $100,000 house, 20%. Makes sense? So if you have any questions on that, I love thinking through this because it's a very simple concept, but it's like the key core understanding of all businesses. That like when you're trying to understand the finances of a business and how to run it successfully and manage it successfully and grow it and build something that's substantial and lasts as an asset and creates generational wealth, it all comes down to understanding leverage, cash, risk, and how it all comes together in a single picture. I hope I painted that for you. Thanks for listening to day 3. Tomorrow, we're going to send you day 4 and look forward to that. Day 4, we're talking about more specific investment strategies. So we've covered the basics. We're going to go more into actual specifics on that. Looking forward to that and looking forward to see you tomorrow. As always, if you have questions, reply to whichever email or text message sent this video to you. And definitely feel free to click the link on this video to schedule a time to talk with one of our business development managers about possibly bringing your property over for us to manage, lower your risk, increase your return. Till then, bye.